Nuclear War of 1812 or how Great Tartary was destroyed. You were all told fairy tales in school that nuclear weapons were first used in 1945 when bombs were dropped on Japan. But, unfortunately, that's not true. As they say, history is written by the victors, and for the Russians, they wrote a history so convoluted it's mind-boggling. Have you ever heard of a state called Tartary or Great Tartary, which existed on the territory of Russia and also included parts of Kazakhstan, Mongolia, and China? They won't tell you about it in school or university because slaves aren't supposed to know the truth. It's dangerous. Although, in some foreign institutes, when studying history, they do cover Great Tartary. There are many ancient maps showing this state. Here's one of them. By the way, Alexander Pushkin also wrote about Tartary when he traveled through those territories and described what he saw. That's where by the seashore, a green oak stands comes from. The question arises, why would someone need to distort Russia's history beyond recognition and erase an entire vast state from history? The answer is, those who defeated and destroyed Tartary. The beginning of Great Tartary's collapse can be traced to 1812, when Napoleon entered Russia and attempted to seize Moscow Tartary. But when he approached Moscow, it was already burning and partially destroyed. Now, let's go through the main facts that suggest Moscow wasn't just burning randomly, but was subjected to low-yield nuclear explosions. First, many letters from Napoleon's soldiers, as well as some officers' diaries, have survived, describing a strange illness very similar to radiation sickness after exposure to radiation. Second, if Tartary was so great, why didn't it help Moscow Tartary defeat Napoleon? The answer is simple. By that time, little remained of Great Tartary itself, as its major cities had already been destroyed by nuclear weapons. These weren't missiles but bombs. Flying machines bombed Tartary's main cities. The question of who was behind this remains open. Looking at it from this perspective, many things become clear. For example, why are there medals depicting Napoleon and Alexander I not as enemies but as allies? It's also worth mentioning the soldiers' uniforms. Why were the Russian soldiers' uniforms almost identical to the French ones, just green instead of blue? Isn't that a strange coincidence? It's more like different branches of the same army, like infantry and navy, one army, different uniform colors. It also explains why most of Russia's forests are young trees are mostly 100,000 to 150 years old. This suggests someone planted them to hide something. After a heavy nuclear bombardment, a so-called nuclear winter can occur. And, oddly enough, official history describes this as the year without summer and similar events in various countries. It also becomes clear why the Alaska Purchase Agreement was written into languages English and French. Why not Russian, you ask? Because Alexander wasn't Russian, he was French. Piecing together these facts and some others I haven't mentioned here, the following picture emerges. There was a Great Tartary with vast territories and a fascinating Vedic culture, similar to that of India. Defeating such a state on a conventional battlefield was nearly impossible, as many of its warriors possessed siddhis, or mystical abilities. For example, Cossacks could fight enemies 5 times their number, and knights Vitiazi were feared by all, being both mages and warriors. While a Cossack might burn himself out in an hour of combat, aging years in the process, knights replenished their energy during battle. They could easily manipulate the psyche of enemy soldiers, instilling panic and fear. In short, by the standards of that time, Great Tartary had a powerful super army that couldn't be defeated easily. But those who had already seized our sector at that time had a goal to create a unified state. Tartary, with its Vedic culture, was a major obstacle, as it didn't allow people to be enslaved as easily as, say, Christianity, which explicitly states, you are a slave of God. But it doesn't say who this God is or why everyone is his slave. This greatly hindered the invaders. So, they decided to destroy Tartary with nuclear weapons. To ensure it went quietly and left no trace in history, they enlisted Napoleon to capture Moscow, the outskirts of Tartary, as its capital was in central Siberia. Star-shaped cities, ruins of star-shaped fortresses, these are all remnants of Tartary's cities. When Napoleon approached Moscow, it was already burning, partially destroyed by small nuclear explosions. But the cities deep within Tartary were almost completely wiped off the face of the earth. That's why there was no one left to fight Napoleon. And yes, Napoleon's army didn't leave Russia, as historians falsely claim. It occupied Moscow Tartary and advanced deeper into Tartary's nearby provinces. This is evident from documents showing how many of Napoleon's troops crossed the border and how many returned. 30 times fewer returned because they stayed to maintain order in the occupied territories. That's why, after 1812, there were so many peasant and Cossack uprisings, as official history tells us. In reality, these were continuations of the war against the French invaders. But the resistance from peasants and Cossacks was scattered and small, so it was suppressed and destroyed by the occupying forces. Thus, in 1812, Tartary was destroyed, and part of its territory was occupied by French troops. Now, the question is, who bombed Great Tartary with nuclear weapons, and who benefited from it? Neither Europe, Britain, nor the USA had nuclear weapons at that time. Nuclear weapons could only have been possessed by those who came to our sector from other sectors to conquer and enslave people. This is what we're witnessing now. They created a system where it's nearly impossible to live without money. People are forced to work for money to survive. Isn't that slavery? They just presented it as a blessing. But that's a topic for another video. One thing is clear in our sector, there are beings who know exactly who destroyed Great Tartary with nuclear weapons and why. And they are the Anunnaki. But more on them in the next videos.